Hey guys, this is Nguyen with BlueFirePoker.com. Today I made a video for tabling 100 NL. I know there was some requests for me to make some videos at this level, so I'm happy to do so. I'll be pausing quite a bit. I mean, there are quite a few cool spots, and I think there's enough footage for about 3 videos, I'd say. So let me get started. I'll talk a lot about the differences between 50 NL and 100 NL, I guess, and the games are a little bit more aggressive at 100 NL. The regs aren't like fantastic, I'd say. Like you'll start seeing some huge winners at 200 NL, 400 NL, etc. The regs at 100 NL are, I'd say, quite a bit better than the 50 NL regs. They have a little bit better understanding. Play pre-flop a lot more aggressively, but kind of don't play all that well post-flop. So I'll note some differences, what I want to do against the bad players, how I want to handle the aggression from the good players as well. In this case, I'm going to be opening, like, I'll play my standard-ish game. I won't play kind of ABC-ish. I'll open pretty light from the button. Like, my steal percentage at some tables will be like 50% or higher. And both blinds here are playing about 18% of their hands. So they're going to be pretty tight. It's relatively early in the session, so um, I don't think they're going to get too out of line, playing out of position, being tight players. So I think it's fine to open up trashy hands from late position. And in this case, like suck guy off here in the top right, he buys in 40 BB, so he's obviously going to be, not the greatest player, and he has posted from under the gun, like indicating he's going to be pretty bad. So we can make that assumption and be right probably 99% of the time. So I'm going to isolate him, expect him to play like pretty awful post flop. So I mean, it doesn't really matter my hand strength here. I think I'll be able to play that profitably. People open limp the small blind. I basically raise any two there, unless I've done it a ton recently, and they might like limp re-raise me with a strongish hand or do it as a bluff. I pretty much do it as a standard against most players. The players typically are going to be like weak tight. Like if they're limping in the first place, like any reg is going to be raising or folding from the small blind. So anytime you do see someone limp, you can just assume they're not going to be that great and kind of inflate the pot a little bit in position, which is what I did. And when I totally whiffed this board, you don't need to bet your standard bet size. So I guess the standard bet size here is anywhere from $4 to $5. And given that I expect Aurelians here to play fit or fold post flop, I don't need to overextend myself, right? So I'm looking to bet a size that isn't too small, but is as big as necessary to get him to fold. So that's why I elect for a smallish bet here and bet $3.50 into $6.70. This will show a profit in the long run. I expect him to fold the majority of the time, but anytime he has a pair like a 9 or ace, I'm not going to barrel him off of it. So if he does call there, I cost myself, 2 big blinds if I do make it 450 instead of 350. Ace 5 suited here, like sometimes you can defend your suited aces, especially from the button. You're guaranteed to play in last position after flop, obviously, but if we look at his stats a little bit, he's playing 42-8, which is absurdly tight. Like he's not going to be a great player, but he only raises 8% of hands. He's probably not positionally aware, but assuming he is, it's going to be less than 8%. So given that, I mean, this is clear fold. We're in domination issues a ton because he's going to have bigger aces and pairs in which when we do flop an ace, we're not going to be able to extract much value because we are dominated a ton of times. So it's going to be easy fold here on the top left table. Okay, in this spot in the bottom left, David Markowicz is going to be an aggressive tag. He's playing 21% of his hand so far and raising every time he does come in. and the tight, weak player calls from the button. He's played a third of his hand so far, doesn't raise at all, so he has, a fairly wide range here. And I mean, I could call here, but I think I'm going to be out of position to David. He's going to win the pot a lot post flop. But when I three bet in this particular spot, it puts David into a tough decision, right? If he has a marginal hand, let's say he has something like ace 10, it's going to be difficult for him to call here with Aurelian still behind, right? So he's going to have to play relatively straightforward, and it's going to have to fold the majority of the time since he is stealing 38% of his hands. He's going to probably be folding here, I'd say a little bit over 2/3 the time. And what this when I do three bet, what happens here is he's going to fold the majority of the time, and Aurelian's is going to call, right? He's getting decent pot odds. He has a hand that he obviously likes a little bit because he called someone else's raise, so he's going to call here a ton. So I get to isolate uh, the fish based on the positions here. So I'd rather three bet and force David out with whatever holding he has, whatever weak holding he has, I should say. And I flop, obviously very good, two overs, second nut flush draw, and I'm obviously betting here. There's no reason to go for the check raise. Like Aurelian's has so far limped, open limped small blind, called a raise, and then called a squeeze from the blind. So he's obviously going to be pretty passive, right? So if we expect him to kind of bluff his air here, we shouldn't make that assumption simply based on the fact that he's a passive player from what we know so far. So I much rather just bet here because I don't think we'll be able to check raise all in properly against this player. Against a somewhat more aggressive player, someone we expect to interpret our check is really weak and then kind of pounce on the pot, we could check raise those players. But against a more passive player, I think betting is superior. Aurelian's calls here, and I mean, what does that mean about his range? He's gonna have 10x, obviously. That's a pretty big part of his range. He's gonna be calling the top pair there. Sometimes he'll raise, I guess, but he's gonna have some flush draws. The board isn't too drawy, right? So we don't really expect him to have 3-5, ace-3, ace-5 all that often. So he's not gonna have too many straight draws here. So any draws he potentially could have are more likely than not going to be dominated by ours, unless he has the nut flush draw. And he will have a hand like pocket nines, pocket eights, pocket sevens, pocket sixes, which is above second pair on the board. And one, he's probably not going to fold to a simple continuation bet on the flop. So I think the jack really, really helps us here. We're way, way ahead of his range, unless he has 10 jack, ace jack. Ace jack is somewhat unlikely. Given how passive he is and kind of weak tied, I think he just folds ace jack on the flop. So I mean, it's pretty unlikely he has ace jack. He has some sets, I guess, that don't raise. He doesn't have much that beats us here. So I mean, pretty much want to go for value. And I have a little bit over a pot size bet left, right? $70 pot, or actually have exactly a pot size bet left with $70. I think shoving here is okay, but given how likely I think I'm ahead of his range, since he usually is going to have a hand like King 10, Queen 10, Ace 10, and then hands like pocket nines, pocket eights, pocket sevens. I really want to maximize against that range because I don't really have to protect against any draws because I have this straight draw as well. So shoving here I don't think is the best play. It's obviously not bad, but I kind of want to break up the bet sizing to get him to pay off two streets. And I settle on a bet of $25, which leaves 110 in the pot on the river with 45 behind, right? So if he has 10x or pocket nines at that point, he's going to be really, really tempted to call because he's calling $45 into a $110 pot. So I mean, he doesn't need to be good that often. The pot's already humongous. So I think breaking up the bet sizing is going to be pretty good against a not spectacular player. And like I said, like easy shove here. I expect him to call a ton, and that's what the bet is pretty much. The bet sizing is designed to do. More likely to shove. Like let's say I didn't hit the jack to shove the turn because I think he'll fold there a ton more. And I'll have the two overs and the flush draw, which is has equity when called. So I think even though I'll be pretty unbalanced, you don't need to be balanced too much at 100 NL, 200 NL. Like you just focus on what their range is and how to best exploit that range. And in that case, where we had top pair, second nut flush draw, and he very likely had a pair under that, breaking up the bet sizing will get the money in. It'll be a lot more profitable against him. So he did have ace 10 there, which was I think fine, like standardish for him. I kind of go through what I'm doing here is I kind of look at their HUD stats, and anytime I see something fishy, I kind of mark them as purple. In previous videos, I said a lot of regs do it. They color code the players and then they look through the lobby, and it'll show up when a bunch of fish are at a table or a bunch of regs are at a table, and you could game select that way. And here on the top left, Duty is 4210. He's not going to be that great. Florida Dave is 59.6. Like smaller samples, but I can make that assumption. Usually be correct. So I'll search those players, and it's just good. Like if I'm multi-tabling, I'm gonna want to know like when the fish are in the blinds, when they've limped a pot or entered a pot, so I can play a pot with them. So I think it's gonna be best to have some sort of method in color coding the players. It's a limp pot with two baddish players. I have ace six, and I think betting here is the best play. I really don't want to give like a hand like 7-8 or 9-10, like six cards to win. So I think betting is best. The king, I mean, it's unlikely that he hit the king. In that, it's just like what is he calling with unless it's king four suited, king two suited. I guess he might peel with king queen, king jack that didn't raise before the flop, but the king is kind of a blank. The spade definitely hits him some percentage of the time. And if he raises here, I'm giving up. But this bet is sort of like has several purposes. One, protects my hand, which I think is likely best against a hand like ace 10 with a spade, or any hand that just has a spade has quite a bit of equity against me. So I don't want him playing for free. And if he did have, like, he's kind of passive. He's playing 59-6. Like, if he did have a hand like pocket sevens, he potentially could fold that hand too. So, I mean, I bluff out some hands as well. So, I do like the bet, and my intention is pretty much to bet fold. Because I think if he raises here ever, my hand is toast. That's a good rule of thumb to have against passive players in general. If they're going to be raising you post flop, they usually have it. Okay, so I open it up again, 5-3 suited. This is kind of a standardish open. The small blind is really tight, which is going to be beneficial throughout the match, right? Because let's say he's the button, I'm the cutoff. I can pretty much treat it as a button because he's not going to be entering too many pots. Drone Man, he's been playing 100 NL forever, and I think he's like about break even or like a small loser in the games. But I know he spazzes out quite a bit, and I don't mind playing a pot in position with him, so I'll be raising there quite a bit, and he makes like a pretty big raise, standard fold. Here's a good spot for Beer Me. Like, so far he has a tight image at the table. He's played 12% of his hands after about 30 hands. So if he is making a squeeze from the button, this is gonna work pretty well for him if he has like a hand like 5-7 suited or something, because it's gonna work a majority of the time. Because I so far have been playing 36-32. I'm gonna be opening a really wide range here. Super Bill, we don't know anything about. When he calls, we can assume it's not going to be that strong since he didn't 3-bet. So beer me here, if he didn't have a legitimate hand, I think it's a good spot for him to squeeze given his image. Like, reverse the roles. If beer me opens here, Super Bill calls, and I 3-bet, given my stats, I mean, it's a lot less credible. It'll work a lot less. So in this position where he has a tight image, I think it'll work quite a bit. So hooray for him if he made a good squeeze there. Top pair on the left, another pretty standard lead. I don't really want um, the flop to get checked through multi-way. It's going to give some players 2-pair. It's going to give some people like King Jack, or I mean King Queen, 6 outs for free. Any diamond. It's obviously bad from a hand. So in a passive table, I'm just going to lead for value with my Jack 9 here. And the 8 hits on the turn. Like, I'm going to talk about his flop calling range a little bit. He's going to have any 9 here. Since he plays 71% of hands and only raises 6 of them, like, I'm going to assume he doesn't limp aces, kings, queens, blah, 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 whatever. So he's going to have any 9 here, pocket 7s, pocket 6s, a ton of 1 diamond hands, right? Let's say he had 4-5 with 5 diamonds. Ace X with the ace of diamonds, king X, king of diamonds. He might even peel with like really low diamonds. Who knows? Like if he had 6-7 with the 6 of diamonds, who knows if he's going to peel with that? But this card doesn't help him all that much, and I'm fairly certain I want to continue betting to protect my hand. I think it's very very likely that my hand is best, and again I'm going to play according to that general rule where if he raises me here, I'm gonna snap fold. Like a lot of times he'll have a slow played set, or he'll turn 2-pair or slow played flush, and then he's waiting to the turn to pounce, and that's kind of what like the weaker type players kind of think. So if he raises a turn, I'm gonna fold, but I'm certainly betting to protect my hand and to get value from like worse 9s. And the 2 hits the river, right? So I think he's like somewhat polarized here, and I don't think he's going to show up with an 8 that often, but I do think he's going to show up with, you know, the ace of diamonds, the king of diamonds, or any like weak diamonds. So I think the best play here is to check call rather than to lead, right? If he does have a naked flush draw on a flop and turn that he called with, he's not going to call the river. Obviously he's going to have like ace or king high, so there's not much value there. And occasionally he'll check behind better 9s, like if he had king 9, it's obviously good for me. But I think checking and calling is going to be better because there isn't that much value in a bet when the flush draw misses, and there is quite a bit of value in picking off a bluff here by checking and letting him bluff his missed flush draws. But he instead checks behind, and I believe he had like ace queen with the ace of diamonds, so I mean fairly standard from him, and I think I played the hand well in that he's going to be bluffing there some percentage of the time, especially if he didn't have ace queen there. Like it has some showdown value, I guess, in his mind. So if he had just maybe the king of diamonds, he might bluff there a higher percentage of the time. And he min raised, so I mean pretty easy 3-bet with ace king suited here. This flop doesn't hit my range that hard, my perceived range. If he thinks I'm going to have, you know, high cards a lot of time, it's not going to hit me all that often. And his limp calling range, or I mean his min raise calling range, I think hits this quite a bit. He's going to have a lot of middling cards that have gutters, or pairs, or open and straight draws. So I think this hits him a little bit more than it hits me. So I kind of want to check back, and since he is passive, hopefully show down my ace king high. And given that he did, you know, limp the hand prior with ace queen and play it like somewhat passively, hopefully he'll just show down his king jacks and jack tens and queen tens and worse aces, and I can just win at showdown. So that's basically my plan, because I don't think my c-bet's going to work that often. If I think that this board hits his range pretty hard, then there's really no reason for me to bet. It's kind of not going to be a profitable bet, and he leads for pot on the turn. It's going to be easy fold. When I check the flop, it's basically checking, hoping to check down and get to showdown. I make it 4x in the bottom right with ace jack because he's playing like small sample, but I expect he's going to be fairly loose. So I think my hand is probably way ahead of his calling range, so I could bet slightly more for value there, and I expect him to call a majority of the time. Make a small blocking type bet because I don't want to check fold that flop. Again, gonna look to isolate anyone that limps, especially early on in session when my image is like so far it's gonna be pretty loose, but it's only 30 hands, so I'm not gonna have picked on anyone too much at this point. So I think I could still isolate a lot early in the session and kind of exploit their weak tight tendencies. So he folds. King 7 again going to be open. 2 tight blinds. I think it's going to be profit. I'm risking 250 to win 150. And given the fact that Pdima here plays 8% of his hands and Drone Man plays 17, I expect the raise to work a fair amount of time. And anytime they do call, I play in position, so it's obviously going to be a benefit for me. A second ago, set guy off, limped. I raised to 450. I prefer like given stack size just to make it $4 there because it'll keep the pot slightly smaller. I can see bet slightly smaller on the flop and have it work as effectively. I like to make it pot size when they have 50 BB or more. When they're playing with 27, I guess, to start that hand. I'd probably prefer to make it 350 or 4 when I am isolating. The tables so far look pretty good. It's a lot of like loose passive or tight passive players that won't give you all that much trouble. So given that, I'm going to be playing pretty loose to take advantage of how tight they were. Right? If it was kind of a monkeyish table, everyone's really aggressive, then I would have a much tighter range in every spot. Like if I was getting 3-bet a ton, I obviously wouldn't be. Um, I wouldn't be playing as loose as I am. Like in the bottom left table, P. Dima is playing 7-7. No Limit Donkey is playing 9-9. So these two are just basically going to stay out of the way unless they have a top 10 hand, 10% hand. And then the Drone Man left, but Aurelian's is playing 37-9, pretty weak tight. So a lot of the times when I raise, Pdima and No Limit Donkey won't be playing, so I deal with like one other player in playing a ton of pots with the bad player at the table. So I'm going to be opening a lot at that table. David Markovich looks, decent. He's playing 22-20, aggressive too. He's stealing a lot from late position, meaning he's going to be positionally aware. He 3-bets a fair amount, so I mean he's someone I won't be looking to play all that many pots with. Without legitimate holdings. And it's a mistake to do so. Like, if there are a lot of fish at the table, you should target most of your hands at playing them rather than getting into like 3-betting, 4-betting wars with like the goodish players that we'll be playing. Pocket threes here. I don't want to check fold this flop because he's playing 7-7, so he's gonna have a relatively tight range here. And it's going to be pretty reasonable that he misses this board some percentage of the time, and when I check, it's going to look really weak, so he's going to be able to bet his entire range there. I'm going to be folding, so I'd rather just bet small. Hopefully he gives up with his, ace queen, ace jack. He probably actually won't be giving up those hands, but any other overcard type hands that miss, like 8-9 suited or whatever, that'll just fold and let me win those hands relatively cheap. When he does call, I don't want to put like another dime in the hand. Like he's playing 7% of his hands call to bet on the flop after I raise pre-flop, so it's gonna be a pretty good spot for me just to check fold the turn. The bottom right, it's limp pot again. K Bruck is pretty passive, a flop top pair, and just gonna lead. Probably lead 3 times, depending on the board. The queen isn't like a great card for my hand, but given that he limped, he's playing pretty tight. I don't think he's gonna be limp calling, or I don't think he's gonna limp and then call on the flop with Queen Jack King Queen. I mean, he possibly can. I don't think it's a good play, but potentially like the Queen won't hit him that often when I bet and he calls. He's a lot more likely to have um, 8-10, 8-6, 9-10, 6-5. Like the open enders, the gutters. He's gonna have 9x quite a bit. He's gonna have 7x. He's gonna have flush draws. So the diamond does hit his range a little bit, and I think there's a little bit more value in, since the queen is also going to be a scare card, right? Like if he has 7-8 here, he's going to fold a lot of the time. If he has pocket sixes, when the queen hits and I barrel twice, he's going to fold the majority of that time. So I mean, there isn't too much value in a bet against this player. And he does bet, and I think it's going to be a pretty easy call. Like if he had the ace of diamonds, I mean, he's probably going to bet it. If he had 8-10, all the straight draws that missed, he's probably going to bet those once I check as well. So I think I can safely call there. Queen hits on the river, and I have relatively strong holding given the board texture, but he shoves, and I mean it kind of sucks. Like I hate the fold button more than anyone, but I don't think it's a good spot to call down. He is playing 14-0, so he's going to be relatively passive. Like I said earlier, if a passive player starts putting tons of money in, I basically want to give up. So I think a lot of the time here when he shoves, slightly over bet, shoves the pot, he's going to have a boat, a queen, or a flush. I don't think he's going to be bluffing. Like, okay, imagine he did have 9-8, 7-8. So like weaker pairs. This type of player isn't going to turn those hands into bluffs, right? So we're not going to have to worry about that all too often. So the only hands we're ahead of are 8-10, which we hold a blocker to, 8-6, 6-7, 9-10. But I mean 10 jack. But it's not going to be very likely that he overbet shoves, and he's not going to turn pairs into bluffs. So I think it's going to be a pretty easy fold. Let me replay this hand. I missed it. Whoops, went a little bit too far back. Okay, so I'll talk about the bottom left hand here. 10-8 is going to be a little bit loose, and I mean, I'm kind of iffy about the play in general because I think David Markovich 3-bets enough and plays probably well enough. So I probably want to open up a little bit tighter against his blind. But I mean, 10-8 plays reasonably. I thought flop top pair, which is overwhelmingly likely to be the best hand, and a 7 hits the turn. And I can bet here, and I think it's kind of close. Like, he's not going to have too many sixes in his range, which he'll be calling twice with. Like, I guess maybe ace-6 suited. He probably folds king-6 suited out of position. So there aren't that many sixes, and if he does have a 6, it's going to be 6-5, which I'm ahead of, and 6-7, which got there. So I think checking here for pot control is going to be better because I don't think there's all that much except for flush draws that are going to call on the turn, and I could kind of pick off bluffs. And when the 7 hits, and he checks, like I'm going to bet against his range here, right? So it's overwhelmingly likely that my hand is best. I have a full house with the 8, and I think he's probably, like, since I checked the turn, he's probably going to lead any 8. He's going to lead pocket 9s, pocket 10s for sure, because it looks like I'm going to check back a lot on the river. So when he checks here, I mean, it signifies a pretty weak holding from his part. Like, he could have a 5, he could have pocket 4, something like that. So even though I think I have the best hand and a relatively strong one, I don't think I should be betting too big because I don't think I'm going to get looked up that often here with a biggish bet. So I kind of want to bet against his range, and hopefully he'll call it with ace high or a 5 or like pocket 4s or something. Make a curious call there. And that's not like it's not like a great thing to do game theory wise because I'm going to be pretty unbalanced there. But like I said, at 100 NL, I'm pretty much looking to exploit a lot of the weakish tendencies and of the other players because I don't think they're going to realize what my range is a lot of the time. So I'm just looking to maximize against their range. Um, I have King 10 here on the bottom left, and the bottom left, uh, P. Dima is really tight, like we've noticed so far. He's playing 9% of his hands, but when he flats me from this position, I mean, a lot of the time it's going to be a hand like pocket 2s through pocket 9s, right? And I doubt he's flatting with hands like 7-8 suited, 8-9 suited. So a lot of time he's going to have a pair on this board. That pair on this board is pretty strong. Like, it'll give him 2 pair. A lot of time I'm going to be barreling my entire range. So he'll be able to call there in position a lot of times. So I think there is value in a bet, even though I pretty much crushed the board. Yeah, I basically expect him to call with all the pairs, and he's going to fold the majority of the time. But if I want to get 2 streets of value there, which is what I'm looking to do, I don't think he's going to be floating and betting the turn a ton either. This is just bet the flop and then bet the turn, and hopefully he calls me down with like pocket 7s. Okay, so I have ace king on the top right, and I get 3-bet by nit. Um, he's playing 8% of his hands, like after 42 hands, but I have a strong holding, and like, his spot kind of sucks. Like, calling isn't that great because I play out of position against a pretty tight range. So if an ace or a king hits, I'm not gonna like, and he doesn't have ace queen or ace jack or something. I'm not gonna get paid, right? So I'm gonna check. He's gonna check back. I'm gonna lead turn. He's gonna fold because he's gonna have like pocket 10s, pocket jacks, pocket queens a lot of time here. So like there isn't like I don't like all my options. Folding I think is really bad. It's way too tight. Um, Calling isn't that great. Four betting isn't that great either because like I'm not going to be doing. I'm not going to be ahead of his range ever. I'll probably be a small underdog against his range for when I four bet get it in. But given positions, I don't even though my image here I'm playing 30-27, 3-bet percentage of 18%, right, which is really loose. This player is playing 8% of his hand, so he basically has a legitimate hand here. I'd say 10s plus, ace queen plus, and when we get it in, like he'll probably get it with 10s plus and ace king. So I'm not going to be doing terribly good against that range, but I think out of position, I'd rather just four bet get it in. I also raised to an amount which I can four bet bluff. Like I don't think it's going to matter all that much in this hand because this player's basically a nit, not a reg, and he's not going to be realizing that. But $26 is an amount. Like let's say I had ace five suited, and I wanted a four bet bluff here. Some percentage of the time, I would never four bet bluff this player. But let's say Storm King was three betting me, 12% of the time or 14% of the time in this position. I'm going to want to four bet him as a bluff some of the time. So. Um, I would certainly raise it to an amount where I could raise, and if he shoved, I'd fold, and this is about that amount. So that's the reasoning for the four bet to $26 here. And he shoves snap call. race. I win. Good job, me. Again, pretty standard isolation top left with queens. I'm isolating that player with a really really wide range, so I obviously have to do it with my good hands as well. And my hand strength again doesn't matter all that much, so I wasn't like, oh sweet queens, I get to isolate this player because he's usually check folding a flop anyway. So um, queens was like nice to have because it's nice to have something in case he did have a jack there, but it didn't matter all that much. The tables seem pretty good. I was playing at I woke around 1, so I guess it's 4 Eastern. So I started playing around 4 Eastern. The games are pretty good. I mean, people say like, the games are getting tougher, but it didn't seem all that much tougher than when I was playing regularly last year. So, I mean, there's not too much to worry about. Top right, player limbs. Again, I'm not going to overexert myself by betting all that much. Like, again, I bet 350 there. People have a standard bet size against poor players. You don't need to. You could just bet smaller and get away with your bluffs cheap. And I did save myself like $1 there, which is 2 big blinds when he does call because my hand is never good, and I'm gonna check give up the rest of the way. Treat that dollar bet as a check and do what I was intending on doing anyway, which is betting. So I'll make a smallish raise there. Expect to take it down a lot and play accordingly on the turn, depending on what I think. Bottom right, it's going to be a standard lead when I flop trips. This is like a good board too because I expect people to call a ton. If he has 7 8, 8 9, 9 jack, 7 6, jack 7, all these pair plus gutters and all of these diamond draws as well, they're all gonna call 2 streets. So this board is like really good for my hand. Well, I mean, it's not great because they have outs, but it's good because they're gonna call multiple bets way behind in equity. And then the 9 hits, right? So this is kind of interesting. Like, I think betting here is standard, but I think I prefer a check, and I'm not really sure actually. Like, if he had a naked 8x, he's not calling, right? If he had a flush draw, he's not calling. If he had a 7, he's confiscated now, so he has 7 high and whatever his kicker is, so he's not calling. So there's a ton of things when that 9 hits that aren't going to be calling a bet anymore, right? So if I shove here, I basically get called in chop, like if he's still playing a 10, or if he has a 9, right? So I mean, there's certainly merit to betting here, but like given how that board comes off, and given how all the misdraws, given all the misdraws and the likeliness that he has 7x just based on card removal, right? I have a 10 removed. There's 2 9s on board, so he's a lot less likely to have a 9. He more likely than not has a 7. I think it's going to be better to check here and call his shove when if he does shove, because I don't think like if he had a flush draw, he's probably not calling anyway. So I think checking is going to be better here than betting. I was thinking about betting too. I'm actually not sure what the best play is. I think checking is better. David Markovich stealing 35% of hands, ace king off. Obviously, pretty standard call. Alright, it's pretty standard 3 bet. I'm way ahead of his opening range. I'm out of position, so I don't really want to play. Like it's gonna suck against this player because he seems aggressive. He's aggressive pre-flop, so I could assume he's gonna be pretty aggressive post-flop. On a board like this, it typically misses my hand, right? If I'm 3 betting a lot of overcards and then over pairs, I think he's going to be floating this board a lot. bluff raising this board a bit, and it's going to be tricky for me because we're playing 200 big blinds deep. Like I don't mind stacking off 100 big blinds, like relatively light if I think it's going to be plus EV or if it'll keep them in line later in the match. But given given that we are 200 big blinds deep, I'm out of position. It kind of sucks. So I mean, check folding here is an option. Betting here is fine as well. Like we haven't played a 3-bet pot yet, so I think he'll give me some credit here when I bet this board, and I don't mind it. And he calls, and the 7 rolls off, and kind of interesting. Like a lot of the time, he's floating in that particular spot, right? Because that board doesn't hit his 3-bet calling range all that often. Like so far, he's folded to 3-bet 100% of times, probably a smaller sample, but I mean he is willing to fold to 3-bet. So a lot of time he's going to be calling here with like Jack 10 suited, 9-10 suited, King Jack on the flop, and I don't think I can check call here because then my life sucks a lot on the river where he gets to play pretty much perfectly against me. So I don't think check calling is an option. And I basically, yeah, since I can't check call, I think he's floating a lot. I think betting here is fine just so he doesn't get to win the spot, I guess, with Jack 10, right? I guess it seems bad, right? If I'm betting just to not let Jack 10 win because I'm ahead of Jack 10 anyway. But if I can't check call here, and a majority of the time he's going to be betting this turn with hands that beat me. I think betting here just to prevent his floats from winning. And if I do have 6 outs, if called, let's say he has like pocket 9s here, I still have some equity when called, so I don't mind it too much. So I at 34 and a 50, which is about 70% pot. I might have been able to get away being smaller. This spot sucks a lot because, like, what is he representing when he raises here? I guess a set of threes, set of fours, set of sixes, maybe a set of sevens, maybe 6 7, something like that. But he makes a smallish raise, which puts me into like a really tough spot, and I think he will be bluff raising here quite a bit because like I hardly ever have a 5 in my hand, so I can't have a straight really when I 3-bet pre-flop. It's pretty unlikely I have a straight, and if I have an overpair here, it's going to be like tough for me because he's going to have some 2 pairs, he's going to have a straight some percent of the time, like at least he's representing one. So if I have like a pair of 10s here, it's going to get pretty sticky for me. I do think he is like full of it a lot when he raises his board because if he had a hand like 7 8, pocket 8s, pocket 9s, something that was ahead of me, I think he's just calling, frankly. So I think when he raises here, he's polarizing his range. I decided to give it up because I didn't really want to play a 400 big line pot with ace high and a 4 straight board. But I don't mind shoving there, and I think it's probably okay given the likeliness that his range is really polarized there between sets, top 2, and air. He's gonna have air a lot more often, so I think I can shove there and make like a pretty high variance play. But I decided to give him one. I decided to fold Jack 3 there. Like as you've been seeing so far in the match, I opened pretty wide from the button, but I obviously adjust based on table conditions. So Baby Don't Cry is playing 21-19, so he probably plays well. He's kind of taggish, and he's 3-betting 10.6% of the time, right? And that 10.6% is going to be higher in a button versus big blind war. So he's going to be 3-betting from that position, probably 14%, I'd say. So since he's going to be 3-betting there a ton, I'd probably just give up my weaker holdings like Jack 3, since it's not going to be as profitable as opening against tightish players. I decided to open the bottom left too, and I think it's fine. David Markovich just won, a pretty big pot for me, and he's probably pretty happy with himself about it. So I doubt he's gonna play it back at me light in this spot, even though he is like three betting a fair amount. I don't think he's gonna three bet here light, so I think I can open properly, and he does. So kind of owned me. I think I could have opened Jack 8 suited on the bottom right, even though I'm from I'm thinking on +1, so the hijack. Like Bjermi is gonna play kind of tight from the blind, and I don't really hate a call from Super Bell since he plays 35-0, so he plays not well, even though he has position on me. So I think I could have opened there. It's kind of loose and kind of close, but I sort of look for spots where I can open where other players don't. So just because I am in like relatively early position, second position, like if two tight players are behind me, I can open speculative holdings against weaker blinds and show a profit, even though I am from early position. Ace Jack suited, I'm obviously going to bump it up. ECU, limp the button, that's usually not going to be that strong of a play. So I'm way ahead of their ranges. So I have a strong holding, kind of just trying to get money in before the flop, even though I am out of position. Nine five suited, like looks like an okay playable hand, and it's certainly a hand I'd play from late position. But like you don't, even though it's min raised by probably a weakish player, you don't want to be like playing out of position with speculative holdings like that. Like 9-5 suited plays okay in position, but out of position it's gonna be pretty tough to extract when you hit. It's gonna be pretty tough to gain information and win when both players have nothing. So I'm gonna be playing pretty tight from out of position. Um, Open up 2.5x. Good board for me. Have ace queen against two players I marked as fishy. So in this particular case, like earlier, you kind of see me betting like $3.50, $4 here, if as a bluff. Like I'll bet slightly bigger here, make it 5x, kind of build the pot a little bit when I do have a strong holding, because they're not going to notice anyway. So I certainly advocate doing that at the lower limits. Like Jack 8 suited here, I think is an open. Even though, I mean, if you look at hand charts, Jack 8 suited is going to be like a muck from second position. If you look at the players behind me, right, he's playing 20-0, like small sample, so we don't know much about him, but probably not too aggressive. And then the button is playing 15-10, so, and he's three betting some percentage, but he's going to be playing really, really tight range. So I could open up a lot wider from this position and expect to play with the blinds, one of which I marked a fish, a lot more often than you would think. So look for these spots to open from some of the earlier positions. I did get 3-bet and owned again, so that didn't work out too well. Ace 4, or ace pre-flop, and probably the best hand against a player. Like, if a player is going to be prone, let's say Florida Dave was a lot more aggressive, kind of like a reg or whatever, and is going to be check raising like a big card into small card board some percentage of the time. Like let's say it was King 5-3 and I see bet there because it's good board for me to see bet, and he's going to be check raising there as a bluff some percentage of the time, and check raising with his kings and sets as well. It's going to be difficult for me to play bottom pair, right? So in that last hand with ace 4 where I flopped middle pair, best kicker, I think I could probably just c-bet against Florida Dave because he's not going to check raise me as a bluff, right? If he check raises me, it's usually going to be a really strong draw or strong hand, so I could play accordingly and just fold and extract value from whatever draws he has and whatever random hands he's holding. So it's fine to c-bet that hand against him. Against someone that's going to be check raising a bit, it's going to be a good hand to kind of turn into a bluff catcher and check back on the flop. Um, the player in the bottom right is kind of like tight, passive, leads into me. I'm not thrilled about it. Like sometimes you can raise there because they're kind of leading with a 10 or like pocket eights to kind of figure out where they're at. But given stack sizes, it's kind of horrible to do so because he made it 3. I'd have to make it like 10. Then if he shoved, I'm like in a really awful spot with good pot odds, no money behind, and a pair. So I mean, I think calling is the only thing I can do here, and folding if he bets again. When he checks, I think it's going to be a clear check back. Like, I guess I could bluff him off some tens, but I mean, it's not all that likely. I'd say like that he's going to lead a 10 on the flop. I'm going to call and he's going to fold. So I think I'd rather just kind of show this down. Hopefully, be ahead of like a flush draw. But usually, I think I'm going to be behind and be losing here. But it's not that awful to like give up on pots every once in a while. You shouldn't be fighting for and trying to win every pot. So far, like I've been 3 bet, a fair amount, and I should be expected to, because like I'm playing probably looser than most people, more aggressive than most people at the table. So I'm getting 3 bet quite a bit, but as you can see, I'm not getting all that out of line. Like I'm gonna play relatively in line. Like the way I make money at 6 max isn't by getting into like these huge wars all the time, like out of position against aggressive 3 betters. It's gonna be picking up a lot of the small, medium-sized pots and exploiting people post flop. So it's a lot of what I'm gonna do. Like if I'm in position on a reg, then I'm obviously gonna be 3 betting a ton because it's gonna make their life miserable. But and I think it's gonna be extremely profitable if people are gonna try to play big pots with me when they're out of position. Um, that said, I get 3 bet by like a relatively sane player. He plays a quarter of his hands, raises about 15% of them, and he's probably not spectacular because he's playing with under 100 big blinds, so he doesn't have the auto reload function going. If he were, I'd give him a little bit more credit for his 3 bet because I opened from second position and he's 3 betting me from the blinds. So in this scenario, he should realistically have a much tighter 3 betting range, right? Because my hand is going to be stronger than average. If I were opening from the button, he 3 bet here, I'd give him less credit. But given that he is playing with $65, not a full stack, I'm probably not going to give him credit for that. So I think he probably just has some like defined 3 betting range, and I think I'm doing pretty good against it. So um, I could I could call. I could 3 bet or 4 bet, and both are fine. Like I'm a lot more likely to 4 bet this hand out of position because it's difficult to play, and I'd rather just get stacks in, or a lot more of the money in pre-flop where their positional advantage is negated. But in this scenario, I have position on him. I have a strong holding. I don't need to 4 bet here, so I think I could make better decisions than him post flop. So in position, I'm gonna see a flop with inflated stack or inflated an inflated pot with decent money behind. And he leads for pot, so I mean I have the nuts. Um, Pretty much gonna be a standard call here. He's not drawing right that often to the nuts because I have both the ace and king blockers to those hands. So he likely has a 10 he's protecting. He likely has a hand like ace jack, ace queen that he's just c-betting with, or an overpair. And unless a heart comes off, I think I'm pretty much stacking him every time he has a pair of tens, a pair of nines, jacks, queens, kings, aces. So I mean, if I shove here, I expect to get called a ton. But given the fact that like he occasionally will have 7-8 suited, ace jack, ace queen, there's no reason for me to blow him off those hands. So I mean, I think it's going to be a very standard call. And then I'll talk about the top left hand in a second. 3 comes off. It's really safe. Just hoping to get the money in. Basically, if he checks, I'm probably going to make a small bet. And then bet the river again. Obviously, snap calling with the nuts, and he had ace queen high, which isn't that great. I don't know what he was trying to bluff me off of. Like, I'm not folding a 10 there. I'm not folding any pair, basically, that I'm calling the flop with. So his hand has very little fold equity, so I think he probably check and fold. Okay, let me rewind this a bit to get the top left hand, because it's going to be interesting, and it's a tough spot a lot of the time. So, okay, so I 3-bet jacks against someone I marked as not that good. And flatting here is okay sometimes, because if you look at his pre-flop raise percentage, it's 11%, which is really tight, right? So he has a pretty strong range, and flatting here is not bad, but in this time I elected to 3-bet. Like, with pocket 9s, I'm almost always flatting. Pocket 10s, I'm usually flatting, and jacks, I think it probably 3-bet about 60% of the time, call 40% of the time. And it comes ace deuce 4, and here's a spot where I could check, but it makes the hand difficult, right? Because he has a lot of ace x in his range, but like if I check there, he can bet king queen too. He could bet king jack. He could bet 9-10, and I'm gonna be folding or calling and playing like this guessing game. So I think betting here is slightly better. It defines his hand range a little bit more, and there isn't like that much value in a bet. Like there is some. Like I think he'll call with pocket 10s, 9s, 8s once, and then we'll check down when he has those hands. But I bet here just basically because checking and calling sucks, checking and folding sucks. And betting here allows me to win the pot whenever, a lot of the time when he does have air. So he calls here. Well, I mean, what can he call here with? Let's think about it for a second. Any ace, that's pretty obvious. Like pocket kings, pocket queens, usually 4-bet preflop, so he's not gonna have that all that often. And then he's gonna have like pocket 10s, flush draws, pocket 9s, pocket 8s, a lot of those type hands, right? And here's the type of thing where he's playing 43-11, so he's not gonna be a really sophisticated player in that he's gonna have Jack 10 here, and he's gonna float me on the flop to bet the turn and take it away, right? And against like a reg, like let's say it was David Markovich, where I think he's capable of making that play, then okay, then I have like a difficult decision on the turn because I could potentially check call on that turn. But given that I think his range here is gonna be a lot of times flush draw, ace x, pocket hits, pocket 9s, I think I could play relatively well against his actions. Like if I check the turn and he bets, a lot of the time I could put him on ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, and happily fold, right? Because that's a lot of his betting range. A lot of time when he checks down, he's going to have pocket 10s, pocket 8s, blah, 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 and then we check the river and I win. So, I mean, that's obviously an okay scenario for me. So I think I could play pretty well against his betting and checking ranges. In that I don't think this particular player is going to be floating the flop in order to take it away with air on the turn. So I think checking and folding is going to be the best option. And if he checks back, just check the river and win a majority of the time. So he does bet 30, and I think it's going to be standard fold against this player. Not much left to be said about the hand. I take a bit, and I basically come to the conclusion in which I just explained a second ago. So I think I'm thinking about that at that point. And I will wrap up this first part of the video and continue. I think there's about 45 minutes left of actual play. So I think that's going to be enough for 1 or 2 more videos. And just expect the second and third installments to follow this one. So have a good one, guys. This is Nguyen signing off at BlueFirePoker.com.